Well, welcome everyone again to Strategic Narrative Underground session number 4. I am going to, my name is Guillaume Viat. I'm the principal and founder of MetaHelm. And I'm going to walk you through today through this idea that narratives are systems of stories. And I want to visually explain what I mean by this. So I'm going to share my screen with you. So let me know if you can see. I think it should be this. All right, can you see that? Wonderful. If I do this, can you guys see yourself in the video too? Or okay, so I'm going to move you down here. So it's going to be interesting for me to do this head nod. But I wanted to start, with a quick recap and boiling down what I've already covered in the first sessions. What's your story is a very common question we run into when we are in business, leading a company. We're maybe an independent consultant, a real estate agent, or we run a creative agency or anything really. CEOs of big companies get asked, in board meetings and public settings, what's your story, right? And I've been hearing this question now for over 20 years. And at first it kind of glanced over this, like, yeah, our story is this and that. And then, later I thought, wait a minute, what does this question really means? And I found fairly recently that this might be the wrong question to ask. I actually believe that what we should be asking is, what's your narrative? And you might go, wait. I thought story and narrative are the same, right? If you look in the dictionary, it's actually kind of true, but there are some differences. And what I covered over the past 3 sessions is recapped here in this summary slide. Story sort of belong from the past in our context of strategy and business. Okay, I just want to make sure that this is clear. Story happen, they're based on events that already happened before. They're closed-ended in a way because there's a beginning, there's a middle, and there's an end. And we are also not necessarily the hero of the story when we listen to it. We consume it, kind of passively, but still they can be really appealing, really compelling, and storytelling in business is a really powerful tool. I think they're crucially important, but I think it's important to position them as one specific kind of device to address an audience. On the other hand, narrative are a different beast. There are concentration of stories. There are systems of stories, because when you turn to narrative, you're more future focused. You're looking for the promotion of the interpretation of a particular point of view that will impact the future. It's open-ended. There is a beginning, there's a middle, and the end we don't know, because you're invited, potentially as the hero of that narrative. Narratives are everywhere. They kind of rule, everything in society. They get people to do crazy stuff. And as I like to say, people will pay for a story, but they will almost die for a narrative. And that's the major difference here. We behave according to narratives, but if you have a strong one for your business, that's a major plus. To change the narrative, what story will you tell? The question remains, remains what it is. You still have to figure out what story are you going to tell. And I've been working on this framework based on, it was inspired by a philosopher called Ken Wilber, who wrote a book called the Theory of Everything. He was looking for a model to basically explain every single practice on earth, and came up with this 2x2 that I'm going to show you. But before I do this, I wanted to ask you a question before we dive into those 4 stories. What are the first things you do when you get inside your car? So if you're a small group, please unmute and just share with me, or if you prefer, use the chat. But what are the first things you do when you get inside your car and you're about to drive?
Put on my seatbelt.
All right, seatbelt. What else?
Parking brake, key in the ignition.
Yes.
Check the mirrors.
I like that. That's useful. What else? Come on, there's a bunch of stuff. I like to plug my phone. I adjust my seat. I make sure my coffee is not going to spill. Right? The list can go on and on. You got my point. There is, according to which source you go to, there are anywhere between 3 to 12 recommended more safety-oriented steps to take before you start driving. The only step that pretty much the only step that always, is constant anywhere you go is the seatbelt. The seatbelt. Maybe also adjusting your seat and your mirror, but really the seatbelt is number one. And it was not necessarily the case about 60 years ago when you were driving. When you were driving a car. I'm going to share my screen again here. I'm going to show you what it used to look like. It used to look like this, right? Because the narrative around driving was, hey, it's all about freedom, it's about fun, you should be able to easily access your car, but also easily be able to get out of it in case of a crash. That was one of the beliefs then. But as we look at these photos, right, we're thinking, I'm thinking, wait, there is something missing, right? And sure enough, the seatbelt was missing at the time. That's what happened in the 50s. That was the case in the crash when the president of Volvo lost a relative. That's not the photo of the crash. I couldn't trace it, obviously, but that probably looked something similar to this. One of his relatives died in a car accident, and he thought he should really do something about safety in cars. So he hired this guy called Hans Bolin in 1959. And Hans was an engineer. He's still alive, and he's an engineer. And he was working with Saab on ejection safety systems for aircrafts. And he poached Bolin and say, come work with me. We have to do something about car safety. We can't go on like that. We lose millions of lives every year. And Bolin very quickly came up with this brilliant, genius idea to change. The seatbelts used to exist already, but they were just at your waist. It was a two-point seatbelt, right? And he said, we have to have a 3-point seatbelt. And he did a lot of research. He's an engineer, so he knew his stuff. He analyzed hundreds, maybe thousands, don't quote me on this, but he analyzed a whole bunch of accidents and figured out that under 60 miles per hour, if you had a seatbelt, you could basically come out of it alive. So that was the beautiful solution right there, the one that we kind of still know as of today. Although the solution was beautiful and simple, it still took Volvo 6 years to get the next car manufacturer to adopt their idea. They patented the seatbelt, and they made the patent free because they wanted the innovation to diffuse and adopt more quickly. Ultimately, their goal was this. This is Jack McDonald. He's an Australian guy. He hit a pole trying to avoid a car, and he's a survivor. Sure, he's a little damaged, but he's still alive. And he shares this with us. Says, if I hadn't had my seatbelt, I'd probably have died. So through that series of stories about Volvo, I want to help you map out the 4 stories that I was talking about earlier. This is the framework that I built based on Ken Wilber's approach. Mine is slightly tweaked, but basically when you look at stories, they can be either internal, coming from you, something personal or that a group has experienced, or maybe they are external. And the first story out of the 4 I call the origin story. It's the story that will give where the you know, the business stems from. It's really the oh, you can't see my slides, right? Okay, sorry about that. How about, did you see the photos I was sharing about Volvo? Good. Okay, makes me feel better. What about this now? Great. Thanks so much, guys. Sharing can be tricky. Okay, so where was I? Yeah, the origin story. So 2 axes. I want to help you map out what I mean by a narrative being a system of stories. And I've been working on this for a while now, and I see this pattern of always the 4 stories connecting together. The first one is the origin story. The origin story starts with typically with a triggering event. There is a realization, there's something happened in somebody's life, or maybe a group of people's life, that create this feeling of strong passion, of conviction, an emotional reaction. Maybe it's a tragedy, maybe it's a positive event. It doesn't have to be so dramatic. Sometimes it's just realizing that, hey, those things should work differently. Like in my case, I was sitting in a meeting 20 years ago at a large company, and I could tell that a big team of engineers couldn't work together. And I thought, they don't have the same story together. And that was a big aha moment for me. And that's what made me want to embark on this journey about storytelling. The origin story is really the engine that makes you want to pursue an opportunity, that keeps you focused, that keeps you going. At the beginning, you may feel a little bit like an anomaly, you know, the crazy lone nut that wants to do something differently. But quickly, if you stick with it, it's gonna, a feeling of ownership, of leadership is gonna emanate from this. The next story is the opportunity. Out of this comes the realization that there is an opportunity out there. So in the case of Volvo, if you know, we go back to that what I was telling earlier, the president lost a relative, and that stemmed the debate about what should be really our cause, our mission. Well, it turns out Volvo also needed a better strategic positioning, and they thought that carving a space in the market for them to be recognized as the safety car manufacturer, you know, safety-based car manufacturer was also a good idea. But they went really on with this idea of a cause and a mission, you know, delivering a destination or a promised land, just like some of my peers will call it. So the opportunity story is really about, where do you want to take your clients? Where do you want to take your customers? What's the promise that you're making to them? Sure enough, along the way, there's going to be an enemy, there's going to be some stakes, and you have to tell it and explain to them why it is urgent to act this way. If you present it to them as a nice to have, maybe adoption is not going to happen, you know, as fast as you wish. Keep in mind, this is kind of hard sometimes, because even in the case of Volvo, like I said, took them 6 years, and 60 years later, we're still debating in some countries whether we should wear a 3-point seat belt or not. The third story I call the perspective story. Perspective story is, okay, now that you're clear about what needs to happen, where you're taking people, what's your take on it? A perspective story is a great reason to disagree. There is a stand there, and that's particularly helpful if you want to differentiate and position yourself compared to other competitors. You will actually make things easier for your clients, because you're going to help them choose between you and others. People who typically specialize in a given area will have a strong tendency to develop a thesis, you know, a point of view, and some sort of ideology, which is the foundation of their culture. They build this strong set of value. They feel very strong about how things should work. In the case of Volvo, the perspective is simple. Every single car should be safe to drive. We're fanatic about safety. And that's what they've been claiming forever. How we do this? We invest in R&D, we we think outside the box, and we're known for innovation in the domain of safety. The fourth story, finally, is the product story. Of course, if you're promising something new, some kind of change, you have to be able to put a product that works in the hands of people. Whether, I mean, what I mean by product, sometimes people get hung up on, oh, is it a product or a service? I want to keep it simple. I mean, product, service, it could be a software. It's really the tangible aspect of what your value proposition is going to be. It's this packaged thing that is easily accessible, easily replicable, that work really very, very simply. So you have to prove that it works. And you have also to have, you also have to have, a good plan to evolve it, because at first it might just be a prototype or a proof of concept. Yesterday I was sitting on a jury for in a business plan competition, and one of the teams had this great idea for to create what we call T cells to fight cancer. And they had some sort of idea about, they had a really strong thesis about how this should be done, and a big opportunity ahead. But it was really hard to understand their prototype. So you will always want to make sure that the prototype here is as accessible again and as easy to understand, as possible. I want to turn back again and maybe close quickly this talk so that we have some time to chat together, and turn back again to Volvo to again take them as an example here. I'll need to stop sharing, and then okay. Okay, I have a technical difficulty here. Just bear with me for 30 seconds. I needed to restart my Keynote software. We'll be right back just after this. Okay. There it is. And now I can share again. Okay, this is where we left out. I've got all sorts of other examples, but I want to specifically stick with Volvo. This is what their 4 stories sound like. I'm not going to repeat myself. You can read for yourself. And that was just for the particular case of the 3-point seatbelt. And that's also what it was looking like. The origin story, the triggering event, the opportunity, save life, millions of lives. I think they've been credited now so far for saving 1 million lives as of 2019, and that was the 60th anniversary of the seatbelt. That's their point of view, their perspective, summarizing their ads and the beautiful solution that we talked about. If you put them together, they almost look like slides that you could have in a presentation, summarized and boiled down to the essence of what your strategic narrative looks like. I mean, it's a very simplified version. There is a lot more details to bring to this, but you've got the essence here, the core of what I mean by a system of stories for strategic narrative. There you go. So my question to you today is, if you think about your own business, your own situation, which of the 4 stories are you able to articulate the best? Where do you find that it's easy for you to speak to? The origin story, how you started, the opportunity that you're pursuing? Is it your perspective? Or is it more about the product, the tangible thing that you're offering to your clients?
For me, it's easy to start at the end, start with the product, like start with what it is that I'm building. But I see the value for the other three as well,
Right.
starting with the origin and moving forward.
What do you find easy about the story, John?
Easy about which one? The last one?
About the fact you're talking, first about the product.
Mhm.
What makes it easy for you to talk about the product, I would say?
Because that's what I'm most focused on. That's what I'm building. That's what my head's in. That's just where my focus is. And it's easy to forget all the peripheral stuff around it, because to me, I already know it, right? But it's the other people that I'm speaking to that don't.
And what did you mean by the other peripheral things?
Like the origin. Why am I even building this thing, right? Like starting with that.
Yeah. It's a very interesting comment, and I would say also that it's not. I mean, not every meeting interaction, not every time you would have to go back to the origin. If you're selling a product, maybe it's not time anymore to talk about the origin of the opportunity. People already know that, and you want to spend time on the product because that's the story of du jour. That's where we want to focus on. However, I'll share with you that one of the things I've noticed, especially working with B2B companies, I don't know what business you're in, but working with software B2B consulting firms too, they tend to assume that their participants to the narrative know the why, the origin, where they're taking. They skip it and they go straight to the product. And that's a pretty big mistake, because what they end up doing is bragging about themselves and how great they are and how fantastic the product is. And you can only do that if people in front of you are willing to hear this. So you have to make sure that you're at that right stage in the relationship where people are primed for that. Otherwise, what you end up doing is what I call the brag zone. And I see this very often in pitch decks. Out of 20 slides, 19 of them are about us because we're so great and so powerful. And we forget to make room to clarify our reframing or understanding of why is it that our clients would be interested even in our product. All right, we got 2 minutes left. Anybody else wants to share which story they're most comfortable with in their business? Maybe it's none of them. Maybe it's all of them. I don't know.
I think for me, the first three are easier because those are stories I tell to myself or in among my staff. It's a more casual situation. There is no external pressure, and it's comfortable. It's the fourth one that I have a hard time finding the right words and the right state of mind to present it confidently.
Interesting. And Joshua, I know you are in you own a creative agency, right?
Yes.
So yeah, I can relate. It's sometimes hard for me also to really present a really clear path or package way to say these are going to be the steps, because in our work we like to think about the work as this blank sheet of paper where we can actually create the process as we deliver it. Sometimes it's a tendency that we have. Is it good or bad? That's a different conversation. But I can relate to that. For me, one story that was really hard, interestingly, was my origin story. For years and years, I had no idea why I was doing it. It was so obsessed and focused on storytelling and all that. Now I'm able to articulate it, but it took me some soul searching to really trace back to that particular meeting in 2001. I was in this meeting, and I'm not going to tell you that story again. I wrote an article about it on my blog, where I was sitting and I was watching this team and they couldn't figure out how to work together. And I noticed that the problem was not a technical problem, it was an alignment problem, and they were not sharing the same narrative. I was 28 at the time. The team was made of a bunch of guys, engineers in their 50s, 60s. They were really impressive with all their technical jargon. I looked at this from a different angle. And I proposed this new approach and that worked. So that was my origin story. That's when it happened to me. But it took me like years and years to figure out when does this happen again? All right. Thank you so much for joining today. It's 9:30, so I suggest that we wrap it up. But again, if you have more questions or stick around for a few minutes, I will do that. Thank you so much for joining. I hope to see you again next week for number 5. Stacy and John, I will share with you the manuscript of my pattern language on strategic narratives. I will do that now in the chat, and because I always tell I will follow up with an email, which I sometimes don't because I forget. So I'm just going to do that in a minute or so. Just put that in the chat and you can have access to the Google Doc. Thank you so much.